you still got to kind of put the work in, because ultimately, I'm a big believer in like what got you here ain't necessarily going to keep you here, particularly at the professional ranks where they have this thing called the draft that happens every year where somebody is getting drafted to proverbially take your job. And so like, you still got to maintain that hunger. You still got to find ways to maintain that edge. And that happens even after you get your second contract, right? Because I looked at it like, look, if this is the minimum that I can make, right? Like, so you're incentivized by making more. And so like, if it came down to it, like, this is the worst that it can get for me, like, man, like, let's shoot for the stars here, because it's literally a once in a lifetime type of opportunity.
Even from that, you hit on something that I think is pretty critical. Like, even from when people have been in the NFL or played in professional sports, they know everyone has a saying like, yo, you got to get to that second contract. You got to get to that second contract. But outside looking in, everybody thinks everyone's happy that they got drafted. I think that hasn't happened in college yet, where they're telling the players like, yo, you need to get to that second contract. Like, there isn't no money on the entry point. It's the money's in when they deem you valuable and they can't live without you. Like, that's when you really make money. So like, transitioning that piece of the entry point to being the celebration to being a dynamic person within it that can hold that value is when you really, you really have the leverage within the business. You know what I mean? Because we could talk about, it, like when you're that big money player on the team, you get treated a little different.
Yeah, man. Everybody
comfortable.
That cash. You get treated
a little comfortable.
You take everybody out to dinner. You take everybody out to dinner. I want to talk really briefly about like forward looking, because we talked a lot about cash and money in your pocket, but for a lot of these sports, particularly like football, which we're very familiar with, and even other sports, like there's a level of risk associated with it, right? Around like injury, long-term care. I mean, there's a bunch of things that you need to be aware of and consider. And especially, thinking about this sense of benefits and like how can ultimately you use sports and leverage sports long beyond your playing days, and how can sports ultimately take care of you. And so like, basically where I'm going with it is like, what's the next step beyond this? Is it like a union showing up? Is it collective bargaining showing up? Like, all right, step one is like, okay, we got a bag coming to us from our schools. What is the next step that athletes need to take as it relates to just whether it be equality, whether it just be like athlete well-being, athlete empowerment? What does that kind of look like from your end?
I think from the standpoint, one, they have to be proactive, right? You have to have an understanding of where you're trying to go through in this business. And then like, I think partnering with experts is super critical, because until like, we got to realize before they unionize or all those sports unionize and there's a collective bargaining agreement, that's going to limit your earnings all over the place. There's going to be a lot more rules and different things and regulations that protect you, will also limit you to have some level of, I can't say opportunity, but level of leverage, right? So like, in this time where you can have leverage, I think it's a real interesting time to be an enterprise asset and start viewing yourself that way. And that takes time and a runway. So like, whether it's more than checks, right? It's about reframing athletes as enterprise assets. Every performance, every social metric like matters, and understanding how they're valuing their journey going through this whole process. Moving forward, I think that's what's going to be very critical, because we've seen, the NFL has a union and a collective bargaining agreement, but the outcome impacts aren't always the greatest, even with those things in place. So what my idea is like kind of transitioning that down with younger athletes, less qualified people around them. I think there needs to be a more proactive approach in putting professionals and experts around those enterprise assets and develop them to dominate and succeed well beyond the business is going to be critical moving forward.